establish new trade policy with China, and that has everyone on edge. But I know this isn't a political show, and you as an economist prefer not to talk about politics, but it does seem to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Dean, is that with what the president is trying to do, there is risk because China is an important trading partner of ours, and if things devolve into a trade war, it could be very bad for our economy and also China's economy, in fact, the economies of most countries around the world. But it seems to me that what the president is doing has largely been embraced by both Republicans, Democrats. How long have we heard politicians and CEOs talk about China not being a great trade partner? They're not great with protecting or respecting, I should say, intellectual rights. It's hard for us to get our goods and services into their country, but we make it very easy for them to bring goods and services into our country. And it seems like for a very long time, the public has agreed and understood with the idea is that our dealings with China are not ideal because, you know, they do some things that are not right. Now, the president's trying to reset that, and there's risk with that. I get that. But it seems to me, Dean, that the market is pricing in that the trade policy will either go back to where it was or it'll be worse, potentially much worse, and isn't factoring in at all the possibility that we end up with better trade policy. When I say better, I mean better for the American worker, better for the American economy, allowing for the U.S. economy to continue to grow. It doesn't seem to be priced in. I know it was a long-winded question, but what do you think about that?
Well, if you take a look at the actual average tariff rate for China, it's 3.54. In the U.S., it's 1.64. So it's just simply getting a better balance. China has more tariffs against us than we have against them. First of all, get that straight. Tariffs can play a role to help a developing country with a struggling economy to give it some protection against global competition. Our economy is so strong, we have one of the lowest tariffs in the world because our economy is one of the strongest in the world. So what I object to most is basically China trying to steal, copy, and replace all our intellectual properties so they can create a vehicle in China or any other product in China. When I was over in China recently, you see a BMW, then you see a knockoff car that looked just like a BMW but had a Chinese emblem on it. Every single car you saw, there was another China version of it. I'm saying, you got to be kidding me. And so they are world-class thieves of intellectual property. Secondly, they're a world-class copier of that technology. And third, they can have committed to replacing as much as they can any foreign source of anything in China if they can do it in China. It's just amazing. It is simply amazing.
And just to catch everybody up, I mean, you were in China recently, right? Were you in China in early 2018?
Yeah, in the middle of it.
All right, so we're not talking about you were there 20 years ago or even 12 years ago. This was just last year, and this was one of the things you observed. So I do think that the tariff thing, as scary as it is, and I could appreciate why it's created anxiety, I do think there's too much negativity around that subject, and part of that is probably a lack of confidence in President Trump's ability to pull off a successful deal. And on the flip side of that, I think part of it is that the media is very, very biased against this administration. We could debate whether that's right, wrong, or fair, or whether they treat him worse than President Obama or better. We could debate that. But I do think that the media is really heightening the tensions by being so decidedly negative in all of their coverage about this topic as well as others. But if the president and if the administration could negotiate and get some compromises from the Chinese, it seems that would be good for America and possibly good for the markets. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. A lot of people they miss that whole concept. Yeah.
So I know, we're not going to get too deep into politics, but I do think, and I believe you said it earlier, that, part of what's going on is this chaos. I call it the circus in Washington, and there's just a lot of drama with our politicians, and in my mind, a lot of bad behavior all around, not just one party, but just the entire bunch of them. And how much do you think that the shutdown, the recent election, all of the drama surrounding President Trump, including the Mueller investigation, how much do you think that weighs on the market?
Much more than it should. I mean, realistically, if you take a look at the gross national product and compare it to the rest of the world, it puts some emphasis on the fact that our economy is much stronger than a lot of people give it credit for, and the politicians do more harm than good because they don't look at the complete picture. Our gross national product was 3.4%. In Germany, which is one of the strongest countries in Europe, it was a negative 0.20. United Kingdom was 0.6. Australia was 0.3. In other words, our gross national product is anywhere from 2 to 11 times other major economic powers. So do you hear anything about that in the media? No.
No. And the statistics you cite, it's not just that we did that last year or we just did it the last 2 years that President Trump has been in office. This is a consistent, recurring performance difference that has lasted probably as long as you've been in the financial services business, including your recent retirement. Is that true?
Absolutely. Well, one of the reasons we won World War II, besides not making as many stupid mistakes, was basically we outproduced Germany and Japan. So that's been way since 1945. And in Korea, same situation.
Yes.
It's always been like capitalism works. Socialism really doesn't work all that well.
But now the thing is, Dean, the market had an amazing 2017 and one of the truly powerful performances in the market. So 2017 was a great year. Most of the major indexes were up 18-20%. Most investors in a diversified portfolio were going to be somewhere between 10 and 20%, let's just say, as a large grouping. But there was a lot of chaos in our politics then, too. That's the first year of President Trump's administration. But even with the chaos and the circus, including the Mueller investigation and all of the other unprecedented things that Donald Trump and other politicians did, the market had a fabulous year. So it seems to me that the politics were able to be set aside when there was a lot of optimism in the marketplace. But now that there's concerns about tariffs and interest rates, we're going to talk a little bit about, and then also we'll talk about whether there's a recession in the horizon. Then I think with some negativity in the marketplace, that then the craziness in our politicians started to look worse. Is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, the performance of the market, and has a trend line of large cap is about 8% and small caps about 12%. And if you draw a line through the performance of the market, in the last couple of years, that performance has been much higher than the trend line of the overall economic growth in market in the United States. So I was expecting somewhat, you can call it correction and everything else, because it was so good that a lot of other people that are using mathematics are doing the selling because they are expecting it. So there's no reason to be concerned about it, because if you take a look at it scientifically, you would have expected it. You've heard it for the last 2 years, economists mentioning that. And no one seems to recognize that's just a normal, just like you described, a normal reaction to a long-term market, and there's really no reason at all to be concerned. And it sounds like What? But it's not emotional. That's just reality. Just buy and hold quality, quality investments.
Right. All right. So could we talk a little bit about interest rates? And let me share with you some of my thoughts to set the table, is that interest rates have been going up, and beginning in the fourth quarter, that really started to give economists and market watchers some serious headaches. But the thing about it is the Federal Reserve, for a very long time after the financial crisis, did not raise interest rates. And then after the presidential election in late 2016, they raised interest rates for the first time in a long time. Then they raised interest rates 3 times in 2017. So one time in late 16, 3 times in 2017. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, during 2017, the market was on a tremendously strong run. Then in 2018, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates 4 times. And the first 3 times, the market really didn't blink much about that. So for the first 7 interest rate hikes, the market and the economy was not negatively impacted by the rising interest rates. I think the markets expected it, and they felt that the economy could digest the higher interest rates. But something happened in late 2018, and the market did not like that eighth interest rate cut, and we're starting to think that maybe the economy wouldn't be able to digest it, and maybe the Federal Reserve was going too far, too fast. They didn't mind at all the first 7, but the 8th bothered them, and even more, the markets were bothered by the Federal Reserve forecasting that they would raise interest rates 4 more times in 2019, and I think that created a lot of headwinds for the market and was a big culprit in what we saw over these last bunch of weeks. What do you think about the interest rate subject?
Well, interest rates can be interpreted a couple of different ways. One way is the fact that someone thinks that the economy is strong enough to absorb these, and that's a positive sign and should encourage more investing because they think the economy is so strong they can afford to raise interest rates. Okay, the other side is that, well, it's going to be more expensive for people to get their product out there, and it's going to be harmful. One of the things that's really interesting, and it's rather new, is I don't know if you ever watched the television program Shark Tank.
Oh, it's one of my favorite shows. I love that show.
Yeah, well, you know how they get their funding? It's through social media. So they don't need as much of the capital investment as they used to have before. So a higher interest rate, which normally you'd have to use to get in business, you don't need it anymore because it doesn't take a lot of money to sell your product over social media. So, and the other thing is that I've been in business a long time. I can remember when the Federal Reserve used to raise interest rates by 1% to 3% at a time. And you really have to look at what are they doing. They're raising it like 1/4 or 1/2%. Now, that's the second thing. The third thing is it's still an old boys network. And some of the people on the Federal Reserve and the new federal chairman, they have to establish their credibility so that when they do something, people can be relaxed about it. They're so relatively new that people are overreacting because they haven't had someone that's been there for 10 or 15 years. So
Right.
you add all those things together. I'm not putting a lot of weight on interest rates. I think it's more of an emotional situation rather than any type of reality.
All right. No, that's very good. So we talked about some things that are plaguing the market and contributing to this really tough quarter and unimpressive 2018 calendar year. But what are some of the bright spots? And then I want to talk on a more long-term perspective. But what do you think are some of the positive things that we can look to in the economy and or the markets that would be cause for optimism? We're not going to make any bold predictions here. That's not the purpose of this show and this conversation. But, what are some of the things that you think are positive, cause for optimism that maybe the markets and even the media are kind of overlooking right now?
Well, one of the things, in fact, it kind of stole some of my thunder, that the